Hi everyone, thanks for joining this NBS Chorus Masterclass covering importing specifications from NBS Building, NBS Landscape and NBS Create. Before we get underway, a little bit of housekeeping for today's session. The webinar will last a maximum of 60 minutes. During the session, your microphones will be muted. You can use the questions box on the GoToWebinar control panel to ask questions. We'll follow up by email after the session. Also, this session is being recorded. We'll make this available to watch again later via the NBS website. For those of you who don't already know me, my name is Martin Marks and I am one of the trainers at NBS, and I'll be taking you through the webinar today. As you will no doubt be aware, NBS Building, NBS Landscape and NBS Create will all be retired at the end of this month, and that is also when the support for those products end. If you haven't already started to import your active specification files from these products into Chorus, then you really should be doing so now. You can also visit our product retirement page at thenbs.com by hovering over the platform option and selecting product retirement. There's also a link to the product retirement page if you scroll down a little on the NBS homepage. In there you'll find further information and frequently asked questions. In addition to this webinar, you can access a wealth of information regarding importing specifications from Building, Landscape and Create from the Help section within NBS Chorus. Simply click on the Help option at the top right, then select Read Our Support Articles, and you'll find the relevant articles in the Transitioning to Chorus from NBS Desktop Products, Importing from NBS Building and Landscaping, and Importing from NBS Create sections. Now, before I switch into Chorus and walk you through how to import your existing files, I'll just outline the agenda for the session. I'll firstly explain what files from Building, Landscape and Create can be imported. I'll then switch into Chorus and walk you through importing a couple of example files. Then, while they're importing in the background, I'll explain what will be imported, then what will not be imported, and some other considerations. I'll then talk you through the import reports, which are received when the import process is complete, and run through some of the checks that you should make. Lastly, I'll run through some important actions that you should undertake once you've imported and checked your specifications. So, what file types, and hence content types, can you import into Chorus? Firstly, I'll run through the NBS Building and Landscape file types. You can import CAWS, or Common Arrangement of Work Sections, preliminaries files. From Building, this would be a .prlm file, and from Landscape, this would be a .lprlm file. You can also import CAWS Office Standard preliminaries. From Building, this would be a .stdprlm file. And from Landscape, this would be a .lstdprlm file. You can import CAWS work section specifications. From Building, this would be a .spec file, and from Landscape, this would be a .lspec file. And lastly, you can import CAWS Office Standard Work Section specifications. From Building, this would be a .stdspec file, and from Landscape this would be a .lstdspec file. And for Create, you can import your work section specifications, which are in Uniclass 2 format in Create. And this will be an .spex file. So now I'll switch into Chorus and I'll show how to import building or landscape files and create files. Now I've already created the project that I want to import my specifications into, so I'll just click into that. And firstly, just to note, it is not possible to import building, landscape or create specifications into an existing specification within your project. Once the specification has been imported, however, and after you've undertaken the checks and actions that I'll outline shortly, you can copy the content over into an existing specification. Obviously, the normal copying rules apply. For example, you can't copy cores work section content into a cores prelims spec or into a Uniclass spec. Neither can you copy Uniclass clauses into a cores specification. Also, any user guidance imported from a building or landscape spec will be imported as a spec note or a specification note, and these are not copied with the work sections and clauses. So I'm going to start by importing a building .spec file. And by the way, the process that I'm going to show you is equally applicable for the other building or landscape specification and file types. So we start by adding a new specification. Obviously, you can give your specification whatever title that you want. I'm just going to call this one Import from Building. And next, you need to select the appropriate content set from the drop-down field. If it were a building or landscape prelims file, you would need to select UK Cores Preliminaries, and the process would be the same as I'm about to show you. But as I am importing a work section specification file, I need to choose the UK Cores Work Sections content set. We now see the Do you want to import an NBS Building or NBS Landscape specification file option. So we just need to click on that. And now we can see an important message here in red. We advise you to action all update notifications in NBS Building or NBS Landscape before importing into NBS Chorus. You can still import the file without doing this, but we would recommend that you action the update notifications first. So next we click on the Choose a File button, and this opens a browser window. So you would navigate to the location the file is stored, select it, and click on Open. Now, underneath the file name field and the Choose a File button, you can see the types of file that you can import with this particular content set, and that the file has to be no more than 300 megabytes in size. And finally, you would just click on the Save button. So the file will now be uploaded to Chorus, and the import process will then commence. And as you can see from the dialog which has just appeared, this may take a little time, and when the specification is ready, you will receive an email. So I'll just close this dialog, and that will return me to the specifications list in my project. So whilst the specification is importing in the background, the last edited column shows import underway, and the title of the spec is in italic font. Now, once you receive that email to say the specification has been imported, you would be able to click on the refresh button and the specification will appear in the normal manner. Now, if the import fails for some reason, you will still receive an email. It will advise that there was a problem importing the specification, and the report which is attached will indicate where the process stopped, and you can use that information together with the support articles I mentioned earlier to pinpoint the problem, correct the issue in building or landscape, and try the import once more. Also, if the import were to fail, the last edited column would indicate import failed, and that will be displayed in red. And if that were the case, you would need to click on the menu button and delete the specification. Okay, so that is how you can import building or landscape files. Next, we'll look at importing a create file. As before, we'll start by adding a new specification. And I'm going to call this one import from create. And I'm going to add on keeping NBS codes. And next, we need to select the UK Uniclass 2015 work sections content set at the very bottom of this drop-down list here. And now we see, do you want to import an NBS create file option? So we click on that. And again, we see an important message here in red. We advise you to action all update notifications in NBS Create before importing into NBS Chorus. Now, a fairly recent change in Chorus means that you can now import Create files with outstanding update notifications. However, as before, we would recommend that you action the update notifications in Create first. So next we click on the Choose a File button. Again, it opens a browser window. We would navigate to the location where the file is stored, select it, and click on Open. And again, underneath it indicates that for Create files we support the SPEX file format, and again, files less than 300 megabytes in size. Now, this part of the process differs from importing building or landscape files. You will see here a checkbox, Keep NBS Create clause codes and titles. This is another fairly recent change. So just to give a little bit of background to this. NBS Create used the Uniclass 2 classification system and NBS codes. And these would appear as 3 pairs of numbers separated by a hyphen, then a /, and a further 3 numerical digits. Whereas Chorus uses the Uniclass 2015 classification system, in which activities, products and systems all start with either AC, PR or SS respectively. After which there is then 4 pairs of numbers, all separated with underscores, and the likes of the performance, execution and completion clauses are based on the first 8 digits of the Uniclass 2015 code for the host system or product clause, together with a / and a further 3 numerical digits. So basically the codes are completely different for the equivalent content between Create and Chorus. Also between Create and Chorus, some of the clause titles for the equivalent content may differ. Now, for some ongoing projects, it may be desirable to retain the original NBS code and clause titles from Create, whereas for others, it may be more desirable to update the codes and clause titles to the Uniclass 2015 equivalents. So that is the purpose of this checkbox here. Now, a couple of things to mention if you do wish to keep the NBS clause codes and titles. So firstly, the create codes will be respected in NBS Chorus, and the order of the clauses in the published specifications will follow the create NBS codes. It will not, however, be possible to change the NBS codes in the imported specification. Also, any create clauses which have been authored from scratch in create will be imported as user clauses in Chorus. Also, any create NBS clauses which do not have an equivalent clause in the Chorus Uniclass 2015 content set. So in other words, a clause which was originally added in create as an NBS clause, but where the equivalent Chorus Uniclass 2015 clause has subsequently been deleted from the content set. And these will also be imported as user clauses. And clauses which are imported as user clauses will not have any associated NBS guidance displayed for them. Also, any new clauses which get added into the imported specification will use the Uniclass 2015 codes and titles. And for the clauses which are imported, which retain the NBS create codes and titles, they will synchronize with the current version of the NBS guidance for the equivalent clause. However, the guidance will show the Uniclass 2015 references throughout. So I am going to place a tick in this checkbox because I do want to keep the create clause codes and titles. And then, as with the building file earlier, we just need to click on the save button. So once that finishes uploading, again we'll see the dialog which indicates that it may take a little time, and we will receive the email with the import report once that has been completed. Okay, so now I'm going to import the same create file again, but this time I will update the codes and clause titles. And we can just see here the import from building has finished. It finished 8 minutes ago, and you can see this is appearing just now as a normal spec, and we have all of the same options that we would for a normal spec as well. To import my create file once more, again we just add a specification, and I'm going to call this one again import from create, but I'm also going to add updating codes and clause titles. And again, select the UK Uniclass 2015 work sections content set and click on the do you want to import an NBS create file option. As before, click on the choose a file button and navigate to the file's location, select it and click open. But this time I am not going to place a tick in the Keep NBS Create Clause Codes and Titles checkbox. And again, a couple of things to mention if you do choose to update the codes and clause titles. So firstly, all of the create clauses which have an equivalent clause in the Chorus Uniclass 2015 content set will be imported with the current Uniclass 2015 code and clause title. Once imported, the guidance for these clauses will be the current version of the guidance. Any create clauses which have been authored from scratch in create will be imported as user clauses into Chorus, and they will retain the NBS create clause codes and titles. Also, any create NBS clauses which do not have an equivalent clause in the Chorus Uniclass 2015 content set. So in other words, a clause that was originally added in create as an NBS clause, but where the equivalent Chorus Uniclass 2015 clause has subsequently been deleted from the content set. These will also be imported as user clauses, and again they will retain the original NBS Create clause codes and titles. Also, as mentioned when I imported this the first time, clauses which are imported as user clauses will not have any associated NBS guidance. It's also not going to be possible to change either the Uniclass 2015 code or the NBS codes in the imported specification. Now, if you were wishing to add the NBS codes in addition to the updated Uniclass 2015 codes, you can find these all listed in the import that you will receive once the specification is imported. And you could copy these over perhaps into the clause prefix field for each clause. Any new clauses which are added into the imported specification will also use the Uniclass 2015 codes and titles. Just click on the Save button as before. And again, that will upload into Chorus and the import process will commence. So I'm just going to close that dialog now. And again, it returns me to my specifications list. And we can see actually the first create file that I imported has now completed. So that is the files I wanted to import. And whilst that final create file imports in the background there, I'll switch back to my PowerPoint presentation and explain what will and will not be imported from these files. Firstly, I'll run through what will be imported. As before, starting with NBS Building and Landscape. So, firstly, all sections will be imported, whether they are NBS sections or user-created sections. And by section, I mean, for example, F10 brick block walling. Within each section, the headings will be imported. These are referred to as clause groups or just simply groups within Chorus. Obviously, all of the clauses are imported, including the text entered within each row, and any bold, italic, underline or strikeout formatting applied on the text in Building or Landscape. Also, any hyperlinks set against the text in Building or Landscape are imported. User-added clause items, so in other words, user-added rows are imported. Also, any rows deleted in Building will be imported but parked in Chorus. And any rows which are now present in the current equivalent clause in Chorus, but were not present in the version of the clause in Building, will be added as parked rows in the imported specification. The excluded status of clauses is also imported. The equivalent of this is parked in Chorus. So if you had excluded any clauses in Building, they will still be brought through into Chorus, but will be parked. Links to any external standards that were used in the specification will be imported. And finally, user guidance notes will be imported as spec notes or specification notes in Chorus. Please be aware, however, that any images or tables within Building will not be imported, and spec notes are not available with a Chorus One subscription. So now we'll look at what will be imported for create files. So all work section clauses with codes starting with 10, 15, 20, 25, etc. all the way through to codes starting with 90 or 90. Within each clause, the text and or linked clauses are imported for each row, including any hyperlinks set against the text. Similar to Building and Landscape files, any user-added clause items or user-added rows will be imported as user rows into Chorus, and any rows which are now present in the current equivalent clause in Chorus but were not present in the version of the clause in Create will be added as unparked rows in the imported specification. Clause suffixes, so the type A, type B references, etc., which Create adds automatically for multiple instances of the same clause, and these will be imported. The parked status of any rows, so any rows in Create which were parked will also be parked when they're brought into Chorus. And finally, links to any external standards that were used in the specification will be imported. So we know what is imported, but it's also important to know what is not imported. So again, starting with NBS Building and Landscape. Revisions recorded in Building and Landscape are not imported. Once the specification is imported, however, you will be able to track future changes in Chorus moving forwards. You do need a Chorus 2 or above subscription, however, to use that feature. I'll mention more about this towards the end of the webinar when we discuss important actions and recommendations. However, if you are importing a building or landscape specification and you were using revisions, we would recommend that you export a final copy of your specification for your records, including the appropriate revision information, before importing into Chorus. You may also wish to make a final revision in building or landscape if appropriate. As mentioned before, if your user guidance notes include images, these are not imported into Chorus. You can transfer these manually into Chorus once the import is complete. Similarly, any embedded images or tables within the clauses are not imported. The editor in Chorus does not support images or tables. Consequently, anything of this nature will need to be entered into the clauses manually after the import is complete in a text-based format. Alternatively, you could compile a pack of such images or tables outside of Chorus and then update the clauses after the import is complete to include references to the relevant image or table within that pack. Style sheets created in the print wizard are not imported. The support articles within the Chorus platform, however, have guidance on how to customize specification outputs. You can import building and landscape files even if they have outstanding validate or update notifications. I'll mention more about this when we review the import report. Lastly, details of the current sources from building and landscape are not imported. And now, what's not imported from Create? So firstly, project management clauses. These are clauses where the code starts with 00, and districts, facilities and building clauses, often referred to as whole building performance clauses. These are clauses where the code starts with 05. Neither of these groups of clauses are imported into Chorus. These would need to be recreated in a preliminaries specification within Chorus. And in the import report, any clauses you had that started with 00 or 05 codes will show as not being imported. Milestones. Milestones recorded in Create are not imported, but as with building and landscape files, once the specification has imported, you will be able to track future changes in Chorus moving forward, provided of course you have a Chorus 2 or above subscription. Again, I'll mention more about this towards the end of the webinar when we discuss important actions and recommendations. However, if you are importing a Create specification and you were using milestones, we would recommend that you export a final copy of your spec for your records, including the appropriate milestone or revision information. And we'd recommend doing that before importing into Chorus. And you may also wish to make a final milestone if appropriate. User guidance notes are not imported. These would need to be manually transferred into Chorus once the import has completed. The name of the last person to edit each row and the date it was last edited are not imported into Chorus. This will be recorded in Chorus moving forwards for any future changes that are made to the imported specification. Style sheets created in the print function are not imported. As I mentioned earlier, the support articles within the Chorus platform have guidance on how you can customize specification outputs. There are separate articles for Chorus 1 customers and Chorus 2 and above customers. Information recorded in the job details fields are not imported. You can now import create files even if they have outstanding update notifications. And again, I'll mention more about that when we review the import report. And lastly, text formatting from create is not brought over into Chorus. So a couple of other considerations to be aware of. Firstly, NBS Building and NBS Landscape files. So if you're importing a building or landscape file which has user guidance notes into a Chorus 1 subscription, then you will not be able to see any of the user guidance notes. This is because the user guidance notes in building and landscape are normally imported as spec notes or specification notes into Chorus, and that feature is not available with a Chorus 1 subscription. If you're importing a building file which has standard or intermediate clauses into a Chorus subscription which only provides access to the small works library, then you will not see the full guidance. You'll also see a message at the bottom of the screen indicating that the content is not part of your current subscription. Similarly, if you're importing a create file which has clauses from a library that you do not subscribe to in Chorus, then you'll also not see the full guidance, and you'll also see the message at the bottom of the screen. So now what I'll do is I'll open the email I have received for the building file. That's the one that I imported first a little bit earlier in this webinar. Got my email open on another monitor. Let me just open that and drag that on screen here. So the email indicates that the building specification file has been imported. Otherwise, it would indicate that there was a problem importing the file. You can click on the link at the bottom of the email to open the imported specification in Chorus. Most importantly, however, is the import report, which is included as a Microsoft Excel attachment. So let's just open that and have a look. So it's really important that you review and understand the report when you receive that after importing your specification. So the report has two halves. So columns A to E show what the file contained in NBS Building or NBS Landscape. And columns F to M show what was imported into Chorus. And there is a row for each clause. Now, probably the first thing to check is for clauses that may not have been imported into Chorus. And you can check this in column E, imported. So where this indicates true, it means that the clause has been imported. If it indicates false, then the clause has not been imported. You can scroll down through the list to check, or a quicker way is to click on the drop-down filter at the top on the column heading. And if you do not see a checkbox for false, as is the case in my report, then there are no cells containing the word false, and as such, all clauses have been imported. If, however, you did see a false checkbox, you could leave that ticked and untick the true checkbox and review which clauses did not import. And as mentioned earlier, the import function will import both NBS and user-created clauses. So it would be unlikely for clauses not to be imported, but important to check nonetheless. Now, if you do have a clause or even perhaps a few clauses which have not imported, the quickest solution may be just to recreate them in Chorus. The next thing you should check is column K, which is the up-to-date column. Although, depending on the project, it may be your intention to import historical information as is, or rather as was. This column, however, indicates the currency of the clause in Chorus. If this indicates up-to-date, it means the clause in NBS Building or Landscape has been imported and matched to a clause or the clause in Chorus. And the clause being imported is the same as the current version in Chorus. If it indicates unknown, please check guidance. It means that the clause in NBS Building or Landscape has been imported and matched to the clause in Chorus. However, the version of the clause in Building or Landscape could not be determined, and as such may be out of date. In this situation, it is important to compare the imported clause against the guidance. When the clause is imported, the guidance for the clause will be the current version of the guidance in Chorus for that clause. An example of something to check would be if a standard cited in the clause is different to what is in the guidance. Lastly, a cell could be blank in this column, and that means that the clause was imported as a user clause, either because it was authored from scratch in Building or Landscape, or it couldn't be matched to an equivalent clause in Chorus. In this situation, it is important to check the imported clause. However, there will not be any NBS guidance for user clauses. Lastly, you should check the column M, which is the notes column. There could be a number of different notes that you would see in this column, but each will be self-explanatory. When a note is included, you should check the imported clause or imported user guidance against the original and supplement or edit the clause or spec note as required. For example, if a table hasn't been imported. Next, I'll open the email I received for the create file. This is the one where I kept the NBS code and clause titles. And again, let me just open that. I've just got that. Just open that on a different monitor and drag that in. Okay. So again, the email indicates that the create specification file has been imported and it includes the import report as an attachment. So let me open that. So now that's opened. Similar to the building import report, it has two halves. Columns A to G show what the file contained in create, and columns H to L show what was imported into Chorus. And again, there is a row for each clause. Now, as before, probably the first thing to check is for clauses that may not have been imported into Chorus. And this is shown in column E, which is the imported column. Now, none of the project management clauses starting with a code of either 00 or 05 will have been imported. So these will be indicated as false in this column. Similar to the building import function, the create import function will also import both NBS and user created clauses. As such, it's again unlikely that clauses wouldn't be imported, but you should still check. Now, using the quick method I outlined earlier, what we can do is we can click on the drop-down filter. Now, it will include a false checkbox because in this case I have these 00 clauses which have not imported. However, to check if any other clauses are showing as false, what we can do, I can just untick true here and then click on OK. And you can see it is only the 00 project management clauses that are shown as false. So consequently, all of the other clauses have imported. Let me just reset that filter. Okay. The next thing that you should check is column F, the up-to-date column. As before, depending on the project, it may be your intention to import historical information as is, or rather as was. Now, if this column indicates no updates pending, it means the clause in create has been imported and matched to the clause in chorus, and there were no updates pending against the clause in create. This could be because the clause was up to date, or that all of the content updates were actioned in create. If it indicates updates pending, check guidance. It means the clause in create has been imported and matched to the clause in chorus. However, there were updates pending in create which hadn't been actioned. In this situation, and similar to what I mentioned for the building import, it is important to compare the imported clause against the guidance. When a clause is imported, the guidance for the clause will be the current version of the guidance in chorus. An example again of something to check would be if a standard cited in the clause is different to what is in the guidance. The update last checked column shows the date and time when updates for the file were last checked in create. The up-to-date column may also indicate updates stopped. This basically means that the clause update notifications were suspended in create. As such, the importer cannot determine the status of the clause. In this case, the update last checked column shows the date and time when updates were stopped. In this situation, you should check the imported clause against the guidance in the same manner as you would if it was indicated as having updates pending. Finally, a cell could be blank in this column, and this means that the clause was imported as a user clause. As before, in this situation, it's important to check the imported clause. However, there will not be any NBS guidance for any user clauses. Okay, so lastly, you should check the notes column, column L. As with the building import report, there could be a number of different notes that you'll see in this column. But as before, each will be self-explanatory. When a note is included, you should check the imported clause against the original, and if necessary, edit the clause as required. This report is for the create file where I chose to keep the NBS create codes and clause titles. And as such, the NBS chorus codes, which appear in column H, are the same as the NBS Create codes, which appear in column A. Also, the NBS Chorus titles, which appear in column J, are the same as the NBS Create titles that appear in column B. Now, let me just open up the other import report for the Create file, where I chose to update the codes and titles. Okay, so now that's opened. In this report, you'll notice straight away that the majority of Chorus codes have been updated to the Uniclass 2015 equivalents. And if I scroll down a little, you will see others that haven't. And these are the clauses that have been imported as user clauses too, as I alluded to earlier. And these are the ones that were created from scratch or where there is no longer a matching clause in Chorus. You can also identify these from the column D, which is the source column, which will identify these as user clauses. Now, updated clause titles, however, perhaps aren't quite as obvious. However, I can see here that the NBS Create clause that had a title of Deconstruction System now has a title simply of Deconstruction in Chorus. And just looking down the list, I can also see the board suspended ceiling system from Create now has an updated title of Gypsum Boards Suspended Ceiling Systems. Okay, so that's how the reports work and the things that you should be checking in those reports. Let me jump back into Chorus now. I'll just refresh the page. Okay, so all of the specs have now imported. So the last item from the agenda was to run through some important actions that you should undertake once you've imported and checked your spec. Firstly, you should run the spec check report. This will help identify any empty values in the imported specification. You should action anything that gets flagged up in the spec check report in the normal manner. For example, completing or parking any empty value rows. Once this has been done, and provided you have a Chorus 2 or above subscription, you should publish the now fully checked specification and save it to the publication history to act as a baseline for any future changes. You should also repeat this for any further iterations required. For example, in addition to publishing the full specification, you may also wish to publish all of the usual combinations of selected content and save them to the publish history also. And by that, I'm really referring to if you publish in packages. Okay, so let me switch back to my presentation. That brings us to the end of the webinar for today. I hope you found it useful. We'll also follow up by email to all of your questions as soon as we can. Before we end the session, however, some next steps. As I mentioned at the start, this webinar is being recorded, so you can watch this and all of our other masterclasses and webinar videos again at thenbs.com/events. If you have any further questions or would like to discuss upgrading your subscription, then please contact your account manager. And if you're new to NBS and would like more information, please get in touch using the contact details at the bottom of the screen. Thanks again for joining, and goodbye for now.